All right, welcome farmers to the Agribusiness Media Weekly webinars, where we delve into the business of farming. My name is Rollins, your host, and I am thrilled to be with you today. Our goal as Agribusiness Media is to help you run sustainable farm businesses. And for those who are still practicing subsistence farming, we aim to help you transition to commercial production. And at Agribusiness Media, we believe that the key to successful farming is having access to the right information. So today's discussion is centered around a small-scale egg production business. So we will be exploring the ins and outs of egg production. And to ensure a comprehensive discussion, we have invited experts from the esteemed Profeeds, our sponsor for this training. And I'm delighted to introduce our first expert, Bianca and Dr. Bianca is a qualified and experienced animal scientist and a technical support specialist with Profeeds. We'll also have Dr. Marutsi, a veterinarian with Profeeds. And with these experts, we have the right resource persons to discuss egg production business. So our webinar will consist of informative presentations and a question and answer session right after both presenters have spoken. And without further ado, allow me to invite Bianca and Dr. to deliver her first presentation on egg production and management. Let's get started, Bianca.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to be talking about layer nutrition and layer production, well, egg production. Our retail platform is called Pro Farmer. So in case you see the two brands, Pro Farmer is basically our retail platform. That's where you get our stores. We have stores across the country. And Profeeds is the factory that produces the feed. So we produce feed for layers, broilers, ducks, quail, pigs, horses, goats even, and roadrunners. And our retail network, which is comprised of Pro Farmer and Profeeds stores, is also across the country from Banket down to Zhishavane. So we have recently been rolling out a lot more stores that offer stock feeds, livestock, agrochemicals, farming equipment, and home care solutions. That's your solar lights and other things that you may find useful in the home. We also have fertilizers and seeds for your crop farming. Right, so now talking about layers. So basically, when you are keeping layers, you want to have very good management so that you get good laying rates and then you get your money. We have two options into growing layers. You can start with layer chicks, or you can start with point of lay hens. So this is a comparison of when starting with layers versus starting with layer chicks versus starting with point of lay chicks. So when you're raising pullets, that's your layer chicks, you need to purchase the chicks. So currently at Profeeds, we're selling them at $1.50 each. And a pullet, a point of lay hen, is costing $10 each. So already you can see that the initial cost for buying layer chicks and versus point of lay hens, layer chicks are cheaper. And then you will require rearing feed for about $450. I'm talking about when raising 100 each, when getting 100 each. So 100 point of lay hens or 100 layers. And then when you are raising chicks, there is also labor included and vaccination cost, which will cost you up to $200. Whereas with point of lay hens, you're just getting your chicks. You're just getting your point of lay hens. And then it takes 4 to 4.5 months to production. That's 17 weeks. And then if it's point of lay hens, you're just getting into business. They're coming in, you're feeding them, and they'll start laying. So that's the comparison. you find that the profitability is the same when in production. You get about $1 to $1.50 per hen per month. I calculated per month because it's not as easy to calculate per week, or you may not see the profitability per week. What you want to do is to realize whether you have money in bulk. For example, if your starting point of lays hens, you need a lot of money to start with. But if you are starting pullets, if you're starting layer chicks, you need less money, but you're going to need more time. In comparison, the total starting amount is cheaper on the chick side, but with chick side, it takes a lot of labor, and you also need to be knowledgeable. So that's the comparison. And then moving on to the talks about how to be producing. So, like I said, we have two options: point of lay hens and layer chicks. So it's easy to take point of lay hens, but with layer chicks, you need to be knowledgeable. You also need to be prepared to put in the work, and it costs less. With point of lay hens, it costs more. Then you also need to be very careful when you're selecting your breeds. You need to make sure that you're selecting commercial laying breeds. So we as Profeeds, we have H&N and Highline. Those are our breeds that we sell. I know out in the market they are very diverse and it's a large group to pick from. And we have intermediate breeds like your Sasos and your Australorps. Those, they do lay, but compared to your Highlines and your H&N, I would say a Highline would lay 355 eggs per its productive cycle, whereas in Australorp it's about 250 to 300. So if you are selecting, make sure that you select a good breed that will be good for your production. And then you also need to make sure that you're sourcing from a reputable supplier who knows the actual breed that they're selling you, because you will need them to supply you with the lighting program, you will need them to supply you with the vaccination program. So they need to be a reputable supplier who will actually help you start your business properly. So in terms of housing, first off, we all need to start with a proper poultry housing. So a proper poultry housing is the one that is standing east to west orientation with a long side of with a brick wall of 30 to 40 centimeters high, and then the width side would be all the way up to the roof. The height of the poultry house should have at the highest point, whether it's a gable or it's a flat roof, the highest point of that roof of that height should be 2.7 meters, so that you have enough ventilation and you also don't have heating problems in that house. So once you have that, or you can once you have that, you can then decide whether you want to do floor rearing, which we normally call deep litter, or you want to do cage rearing. Cage rearing is good because it increases your capacity. And then we have other systems like the multi-tire system. It's a cage system with tires. I'm sure that's the most popular on the market right now, because you've got your chicks, you have a tire, maybe 4 tire, that will actually increase your capacity by 4 times compared to the floor rearing. So we also have free range. Free range is good. because you have a higher value of your eggs on the market, because some people actually prefer eggs that were not raised in restricted areas. This is because it's better for their welfare. So some people are sensitive to that, and you actually, as a farmer, you get more value for your eggs if you're doing free range. But it requires you to have a lot of space, so that you also have higher stocking densities. So it needs a lot of space. And then we have what we call enriched cages. Those are also an option. I haven't seen any in Zimbabwe, but enriched cages are also favorable to the animal welfare of layers if you are doing a cage system. So these are a little bit bigger, and they have patches inside the cages where the hen can go and scratch and prune, that's expressing its normal behavior. So you will notice that birds in enriched cages or in the deep litter system are less aggressive as compared to birds in cages where they are housed, where there's no option to express their normal behavior. So our stocking densities, so we start in the deep litter system, we start at 15 birds per square meter and the brooder, and then we increase that as we go on. Maybe the first week we're at 15, and as we grow, we increase depending on how essentially you want to increase your size of the brooder as the birds go. Maybe every 2-3 days you are checking if your stocking density is still fine, such that by the time that you get to the grower phase, you are at 8 birds per square meter. And then when you're in production, you are at 6 to 8 birds per square meters. I've also not seen people raising layers and cages from layer chicks, but it's also an option that that is happening in developed countries. So they're doing it at 32 birds per square meter initially, and then at grower phase it's 16 birds per square meter, and at production phase is 8 birds per square meter. So the stocking density, when we give a range, is because we want you to have a guidance, because in cooler climates you require less space, and then in hotter climates you require more space. Even seasonally, in winter you require less space, and then in summer you require more space. So when you are building or when you're purchasing your cages, you need to bear that in mind. When raising pullets, so you brood for the brooder stage stretches for up to 6 weeks, and then you need to make sure that the temperature range is from 32 to 36. Of course, the temperature reduces as the birds grow. And then you also need to ensure that you have light. So the light that I'm talking about is not the infrared light, it's the actual light for the birds to see, because layers do have lighting programs which are very essential to the stimulation of the egg production cycle and to their sexual maturity. So you also need the light to make sure that the birds, if you're doing a lighting program, it makes sure that the birds are growing uniformly and they start production uniformly. So lighting programs, like I was saying, they also encourage frame development, and they promote growth, and they vary according to the breed of the bird. So you want to be slowly stepping down the lighting program so that you do not stress your birds. So an example of a lighting program, this one is a highline lighting program. So it starts off with 22 hours of light, and it goes down back to 13.5. So what you want to do is when you purchase layers, or whether it's point of lay hens or it's layer chits, just ask for the lighting program in store, and they will share it with you. This one is an H&N lighting program. It starts off with 24 hours for 2 days, and then it goes down to 16 hours, and then later on to 12 hours. It is essential for the birds to actually get dark hours. As you can see on both lighting programs, they are dark hours. This darkness is important for the birds to produce, they produce certain hormones that help them grow, and that also help them develop sexually as well. Like I said earlier, light is very essential to the stimulation of the egg production cycle. On the nutrition part, so we start off with chick starter mesh. This is Profeeds feeds, so I'm going to be talking about nutrition with Profeeds. So we start off with chick starter mesh, which is 18.5 crude protein, and you are on this feed up to 8 weeks. So you are starting off from the first 6 weeks of the brooder, and then an extra 2 weeks. For budgeting purposes, you want to work with 1.7 to 2 kgs of feed for the 8 weeks. We expect the birds to get to an average weight of 0.6 kgs after the period. It's very essential for a farmer to be taking weights for layers, because you want them first off to grow uniformly, and you don't want them to be overweight or underweight, because both being overweight and underweight may have an effect to its during its production cycle. So you want your birds to be uniform, and you want them to be growing according to these guidelines. So after 8 weeks, you then move on to layer developer mesh. Remember, when you are switching feed, you need to make sure that you are you do what we call a changeover regime. So essentially, you're starting with 75% of the old feed and 25% of the new feed, and then on the next day you say 50% of the old feed and 50% of the new feed. On the next day, it's now 75 of the new and 25 of the old, and then eventually you're giving 100% of the new feed. This is done so that the birds get used to the new diet smoothly. You do not shock it by just suddenly changing the feed, because suddenly changing the feed may reduce its intake, and this will affect your performance. So we then move on to a layer developer mesh, which is 15% crude protein. As the bird starts to grow, it needs more protein, and then when it's now just developing, it needs less protein, and you want it to have controlled growth. You don't want it to overgrow, so that by the end of the 7th week, you will have an average weight of 1.4 kgs. So what you want to make sure is that you are feeding ad lib. You are not restricting feed, so the bird will feed what it needs and will just grow. If everything is okay, if the management is okay, you will easily attain these weights. And then from there, you then move on to Prelayers mesh, which has a higher protein value. This is because we're now preparing the bird to be eating an even higher protein value. We have higher protein values in our productive feed, the layers mesh phase 1 and the Prelay, because and the bird is now producing an egg, and it takes also some nutrients. So we're trying to balance the nutrients for the birds to maintain its growth and its body, and also to be producing. So Prelay mesh is a transition feed. It allows the birds to get used to calcium metabolism, and it also enhances the uniformity and the flow. Say maybe you had not reached the target weight. After calculating your uniformity, you find that you have maybe 60% uniformity. You take that 40% and you put it on Prelay mesh and you feed it ad lib. It will help the birds to gain weight. So, and this, with all things normal, you are essentially just preparing the birds to move on to a productive feed, and you feed this feed for up to 5% of production. So when I say 5% of production, I'm saying maybe if you have 100 birds that are 17 weeks old, you feed them the layers mesh until you are getting 5 of those birds dropping eggs consecutively. So you feed them ad lib, and then you monitor the laying rate. If 5 out of 100 of those birds are laying consecutively, you stop and then you move on to Prelay's mesh. You do not feed Prelay's mesh for more than 10 days. If your hens are not producing eggs at day 10, we advise that you get in touch with us, and we'll advise on what to do. We'll try to troubleshoot with you what could be wrong, and then we can advise what to do next. So after Prelay's mesh, we then move on to layers mesh.
Okay.
So layers mesh phase 1 is 16% crude protein. This is to cater for the egg that is producing. Also, you remember that layers at 18 weeks are still growing. That's why we have a higher protein, and then and it's also producing. So we need the nutrients for the hen to be able to be producing eggs. You feed this feed from 5% of production to up to 45 weeks of production. So by weeks of production, I mean when the hen is actually producing eggs. That's when you start counting by first week, second week, third week, not the age of the hen. So here we now start to restrict feed. So it's 110 grams per hen per day. You need to split the feed so that you spread the nutrients throughout the day. So you need to separate the rations by at least 6 hours. So you also need to make sure that you are very consistent with your feeding times. If you pick 6 a.m., it has to be 6 a.m. throughout the production phase. If you pick 6 a.m. and 4 p.m. or 5 p.m., it has to be those times throughout the production phase. You also need to be very consistent with your times to pick eggs. You want to be picking eggs again 2 times per day, so that you don't have eggs spending the whole day in the poultry house. And this normally creates the egg eating habits, because once the egg cracks and the birds taste it, they are going to get into the habit of eating eggs. So you want to be consistent with your feeding times. You want to be consistent with your egg picking times. Then we then move on to layers mesh phase 2. So layers mesh phase 2 is made for hens that have been producing for 45 weeks. And on the first 46th week of production, you move to layers mesh phase 2. This has lower protein because the hen has finished growing. So it's 15.5% crude protein, and you feed this up to approximately 78 weeks of production. Once your hens are producing less than 60%, you need to cull them. Culling is getting rid of them. Or killing is a strong word. We use cull so that you get a new batch of layers. So you also want to make sure that you are recording your laying rates so that you know when to cull your birds, and you need to know that the length of the production cycle of your breed. So for our breeds, it's 1 year, 8 months. So you need to then watch out what your laying rate is, and see if it's still profitable or not, so that you make a decision to cull. Right. So again, you split the feed. It's still 110 grams per hen per day. That was a typo. So you're still doing the same 110 grams per hen per day, and it's also splitting. You're still being consistent with your feeding times. So it's very important to weigh your birds. You need to make sure that you're weighing your birds initially when they come into the poultry house, whether it's layer chicks or point of lay hens, so that you know what weights they are. And every week you also want to be measuring that weight. You also want to measure your egg production. You measure the egg weight. You also measure the laying rate. So the laying rate is just the total number of eggs that you're getting out of the hens that you have. That's your laying rate, and you multiply by 100 to get a percentage. And you also want to know and record your mortalities. We normally get people calling in with problems or issues, and they don't even know how old their hens are. And it gets very difficult to try and help someone. Sometimes maybe they're not laying because they're now too old, but you don't know that because you haven't been keeping records, or you don't know that you are now below 60%, but you're still buying feed, and you're still spending money on beds which are no longer profitable. Some even cow birds that are still young, but because of mismanagement, they're not producing enough, and then they think that, oh no, I need to get rid of these birds because they're no longer laying. So it's very important to keep records so that troubleshooting is easy. And you also want to be able to replicate what you've done. If it's a success, you need to be able to replicate what you've done, so you can go back to your records and see how you did it, and then you replicate it. Bed uniformity is very, very important in layers, because once you get it wrong, you are also not going to get your laying rate right. So, for example, you raise your layer chicks, and they do not get to 1.4 kgs at 17 weeks. All of them, maybe the uniformity is like 60%. You need to be aware that 60% of those birds are going to start laying, and 40%, some may start laying, but they will be so small. And if the hen has a smaller frame, and it's sexually mature, or you stimulate it to start laying, it may result in issues like egg binding, where if the birds are overweight, you also get issues like, you find egg stains and etc. So you want to be measuring your uniformity, you want to be measuring your weight, so that you make sure that your flock has the same weight, average weight, and you don't have issues. You also need to make sure that you're vaccinating. Vaccinating is very important, and it will help you to avoid a lot of problems that you may face in the future. When you're purchasing point of lay hens, make sure that you purchase your layers from a reputable supplier who has been vaccinating. So that person can only be Profeeds. Unfortunately, It's very difficult to trust individuals these days. And we do hear a lot of issues concerning animal health. I'm sure Doc is going to emphasize on that later. So moving on. So this is just a graph that shows what you should be expecting. So your peak production, you expect it from week 20 up to week, let's say maybe 27, and then the egg production starts to decline from there on. So you want to make sure that your birds are in good shape when they get to sexual maturity, so that you also get that peak production. Some people have a tendency of giving their birds what we call boosters when they've just purchased point of lay hens, and then they buy the pre-layers mesh phase 1, or they buy the pre-layers mesh and they buy also the boosters, and they buy their layers mesh phase 1, and then they give the booster and the feed as well, and then the eggs start producing very large eggs, and this results in prolapses and stained eggs and egg binding and all these sorts of issues. So you want to know what weight of eggs you should expect at what age. So this graph essentially shows that, and that's why I said it's very important to measure the egg weight. So I normally don't encourage people, if they're not having any issues, to give what we call egg boosters. I think I saw a question on that. I normally don't encourage people to give egg boosters when it's not necessary, because you're just going to increase the egg size, and your birds may actually be still smaller for that size of an egg, or for the double yolks and etc. And it will actually result in mortalities, or your birds getting stressed and eventually reducing their laying rate. So you just want to feed just enough. So as you can see, the egg weight increases with time as the birds get older, which also means that they will also have a bigger frame at that time. So this is just a growth guideline adopted from Highline. So you also, like I said, if you're measuring your weights, it's important for you to know what to expect and when. So there's something called molting. So molting, it happens 3 times in the life of a hen. So the 3rd time is mostly crucial for us, because that's when the hens will actually be producing. So you need to make sure that when they are molting, they have enough nutrition, because molting actually sometimes results in dropped laying rates. So if you are not feeding the right feed, if you're not feeding Profeeds layers mesh phase 1, you may end up getting a reduced laying rate. Our feed, like I mentioned earlier, will have more protein. It will have better, a very good nutritional value, which counters for that 3rd molting period, so that you do not actually feel the impact of that 3rd molting, which happens during the production cycle. So these are the common causes of poor laying rates in egg production. So we have stressful environment. This ranges from the weather elements and the management aspect of things. So you need good bedding, good ventilation, and some people have the tendency of buying layer cages, and you just put them at the back of the house. There's no poultry house, there's no shade, nothing. It's just out in the open. That is a very stressful environment, and we should not expect to get eggs from that. Layers are very sensitive, and anything that stresses them, they will stop producing. So you need to make sure that your management is on point, and in times of stress, you actually provide vitamins. For example, you can give them stress pack, and if it's heat stress, especially during the summer period, summer season, you need to have what you call beta salt Z. It also helps with heat stress. Poor weights. Normally, when people buy layers, you normally point of lay hens. That's when you normally face these issues whereby someone buys the layers, they do not measure their feed. It's very important to measure the feed. They actually take away a scale and measure if your feed, if it's 10 beds, you're actually doing 110 grams times 10, so that you get your 1,100 grams on a scale. Not to say, this packet of sugar is 2 kg. So if I put 2 kgs of feed in there, that's 2 kgs of, that's actually 2 kgs. Put feed in a 2 kg paper, and you think it's 2 kg. That's wrong, because remember, if we also put sand or stones in that 2 kg plastic, it's not going to be 2 kgs. So you actually need to use a scale to measure your feed. So normally we get people getting point of lay hens, and they do not feed them enough, and they lose weight. And once they lose weight, they do not produce hens. They do not produce eggs. So we need to make sure that we're actually giving them the right amount of feed. And we also, in a case that you've raised your own eggs, like I mentioned earlier, if your uniformity is low, the underweight birds will not lay. It's also very important to make sure that you have your hens have good nutrition. There are a lot of issues that you can avoid simply by giving your birds good nutrition. Our feed, fortunately, there is no need for one to be adding what you call calcium grit. I think I saw someone was saying they were adding salt blocks, or I think it was actually calcium grit that they were adding. So if you actually grab a handful of our feed, you may actually grab a piece or two of the calcium grit, and it's also very soluble. The other issue that you may get from other feeds is that the calcium grit is there, but it's not very soluble. So the calcium is actually not going to be very available for the hen, and you are going to get, these issues of egg binding, soft shells, cracked shells, and etc. So simply by giving the right feed, you will get your laying rate right, and you also avoid a lot of issues. Hydration is also very important. One thing to notice, one way to notice if your hens are not properly hydrated is by checking the comb. It's supposed to be bright red and shiny. If it's pale and it looks like someone who has not applied skin lotion, you should know that it's hydrated. So dehydration normally occurs during the summer season, and you need to make sure that you have enough feeders and drinkers. So for adult birds, or even the chick fawns and the chick trays, it's normally 30 birds per unit. So one drinker, it caters for 30 birds. So you need to make sure that those ratios are right. If it's nipples, it's 4 to 5 birds per nipple. So you need to make sure that those ratios are right, so that all your birds are properly hydrated and have access to water. If you're using if you're using if you're using nipples, you also need to do a daily check on those nipples so that you actually make sure that they are giving your birds water. Then lighting and light intensity. So layers layers actually require like I said earlier, a lighting program, and you also need to make sure that the intensity is right. We normally don't have tools to measure this, but essentially it's supposed to be 30 to 50 lux of light. You can try, if you get a newspaper and you get into the poultry house, you need to be able to read that newspaper, or at least see the words on the newspaper from the floor. Also, your light doesn't need to be too bright. If it's too bright, your hands are going to get stressed. So if you notice that the newspaper is actually too bright, or you cannot properly read because it's too bright, that means that your light may be actually too bright for the hands as well. And then we have health. Dr. Garika is going to cover more of the health issues. Molting, I mentioned about that earlier. And we also have abnormal behaviors like cannibalism and egg eating habits. These actually also reduce your laying rate, because the birds will then be stressed, and stressed birds do not lay. So cannibalism normally begins with a stressful environment. Whenever a bird cannot express its normal behavior, it gets aggressive. And whenever a bird is stressed, particularly heat stress, it turns bright, like it turns red. And this red color actually attracts birds that's why we have red drinkers and red colored feeders. So birds start pecking on each other due to stress, becomes aggressive due to stress. So they start pecking on each other, and once one hen is pecked and it's oozing blood, it's going to attract more birds to go and peck onto that bird. So once you have that problem, you need to make sure that you take the hen away from the rest of the flock. And once and you make sure that you quarantine it and it gets some time to heal. Egg eating, you need to make sure that you have strong shells. Strong shells, you get them from good nutrition, and you also need to be consistent with your egg picking. You also have broody hens. Broody hens are hens that are trying to sit on the eggs and hatch them. Normally, these are a result of a short light period or a dim light. So you need to make sure that you have good light intensity. In producing hens, you need 16 hours of light. So you need to make sure that you are giving your hens, if they are laying, at 16 hours of light. So that means that from during the day, you get your 12 hours, and some are maybe 11 and a half hours in winter. You turn on your artificial lights, and then your birds get your 16 hours. So maybe if it's 12 to 12, you're turning off your lights at 10 p.m. so that you get that extra 4 hours of light. So that's it from my end. If you want help, you can get hold of our tech team. That's including myself. There is my number, Bianca and Dr. 0779-651-702. And we also have Tinashe Kashiri 0775-920-399 and Calvin Changwesha 0778-655-091. And we also have, of course, Dr. Garikayo, who's going to talk to us just now. Thank you.
All right. Many thanks, Bianca, for such a great presentation. And you covered key issues there, including the breeds, housing, nutrition, and economics of production. And I liked the comparison between raising pullets from chicks and starting with point of lay hens. It has been a burning question in our platforms or on our platforms, and I hope farmers you were answered on that one. So if you have questions for Bianca, please send us via the chat room as soon as we open here on Zoom. And if you're watching live on Facebook, please do use the comment section. Bianca is on standby for question and answer. Then maintaining a healthy flock is key to the success of your egg production business. However, what does that mean and what does it involve? Dr. Garikai Marutsi is ready for a presentation on how to maintain a good layer health. Please, Doc, go for it.
Well, thank you very much, Rawlings. A pleasant morning to you all, our farmers. Let me share my screen. Right, I hope everyone is now privileged to see the screen.
Yeah, sure. We can see your screen, Doc. Please go ahead.
All right, super good. Many thanks, Rawlings. So as of today, my name is Karkai. I'm the veterinarian for Profeeds, and I'm going to take you through layer health. So basically, as we progress into layer health, I would love to just give you a recap on the dynamics of coming into lay. So many farmers, sometimes they are not aware that the journey to lay an egg doesn't only start at point of lay, which is at 18 weeks. So it's a process, and the products that you'll be carrying are biological products, which is the hen. So we prepare for laying from the day the chick hatches from its egg all the way until it gets to lay, and we support the laying until we get into a persistent laying until the end of the cycle. So what our farmers really need to be aware of most of the time is the fact that when you are rearing pullets, just make sure you are there to promote the pullet growth, make sure they are getting to their targets. If there are any issues to do with underweights, try to correct it in the best way possible via management. Why? This is because the point, our pullets or our chicks, they usually do not have a very good appetite. So if you are lagging much behind, then you have challenges at the end. So this is a bird that is, we can liken it to a long distance runner. So we need to build a frame of the bag for persistence. It will take a long time, and it is from the cemented calcium within the bones that will get the calcium for the eggs in future. And another thing is, as we support the pullet to get to a laying hen, we are going to see that we are going to have the birds getting to a point of lay. So it's not only an issue of the bird getting to 18 weeks. 18 weeks just signals the point at which the bird is mature, and so that's sexual maturity age. And then what we really love also is to have the bird having the right weight. So if the bird has a right weight, which is around 1450 grams or peri, that weight, which informs us that all the internal organs and the reproductive system included, they are now prepared to manufacture the egg. And we also need a stimuli or or stimulus, which is adequate lighting within the environment and where the bed is. And last but not least, you have adequate or the right nutrition to help build the egg. So this is what we are looking at. And beyond this, we are now supporting the laying bed, making sure it persists so that we make a lot of money. So to help on persistence, we need good nest box hygiene, we need adequate nutrition, and we need to minimize issues to do with stress levels to this bed. So I think this recap was something that I thought we should just jump into just before we run into our presentation. Now, I decided to start on floor laying because this is an issue that we see when we move around helping farmers. What we have noticed is that most of our farmers, some they actually boast that my beds can just drop eggs everywhere and then I just move around picking. That is not a healthy situation. Each time a bed lays, part of its reproductive system comes out, and depending on the environment on which the bed is laying, then we may have several consequences. So if the environment is dirty, you will find that most of the time we end up with reproductive infections if the beds are laying on the ground. And another issue that we need to also understand is with our beds, they tend to love to lay on the dark spots within the house. So if the house doesn't have adequate laying, beds will usually lay in the dark spots. That's why you see most of the time they lay behind the door, in corners, or even on the shadow cast by physical objects within the house, which also hints us to the fact that we need to make sure we remove unnecessary or unwanted physical objects within the house, because within their shadows, that's where we may end up having our beds liking to lay in. And so basically, the reason why we do not like or don't want to promote floor laying is so that we minimize issues to do with reproductive infections, a drop in production, and even sometimes a mortality. So with a laying bed, it can push up to 6 months without giving an egg, but taking feed, especially if it has these infections. So as a biological product, it tries to fight off the infection, but at the end of the day, you are keeping the bed so that you make more money. So if you do not support the laying bed in any way, then we are bound to have a lot of issues. So please make sure that when you are having these beds, you eliminate dark areas within the house. You have well-built nests for those who are in deep litter, and you replace nest box litter regularly for those who are using nest boxes. And for those who are using cages, just make sure, especially the bottom tier cage, it's well clear from the manure that's dropping on the bottom. Try to make sure you have a clearance of at least 20 to 30 centimeters and remove frequently the manure, because it's also a source of bacteria. So always remember this. Floor laying is quite a bad practice, and we wouldn't want our farmers to focus on that, because by the end of the day, we are damaging the reproductive system that's supposed to carry the egg. Now, I'm going to push you to the next item on presentation, which is blood on egg cells. So many times when you would receive calls from farmers and they would say, hi Gary, I'm having an issue, and you would ask what's happening, and the farmer will tell you, my beds are now laying extra big eggs. And like, wow, extra big eggs. How old is your layer? You find sometimes the farmer would say, my bed is about 22 weeks, and you would wonder how on earth would a 22-week-old bed get into lay extra large beds. So what I want to encourage you farmers on this regard is make sure you don't jump into conclusions before you investigate. Investigate the issues that seem abnormal within the chicken house. The moment you pick or see blood on eggs, try to understand if you can routinely weigh the weights, the egg weight, as you collect the eggs. This will help you to separate lies from the truth, or funny imaginations from what's actually happening. So what you will see that when birds start laying, you find that they start with small eggs, then into medium-sized eggs, then into large eggs, then to extra large eggs. But you will find that most of the extra large eggs, they are laid when the bird is almost into past its young production age, which is maybe somewhere around over 30, 32 weeks. That's when you may start picking maybe one or two. But in its entire lifespan, so most of the time you will find that we really give more than 4 to 5% in terms of the population of these extra large eggs. So basically, we also have a challenge with farmers who would call, like, I want to make my eggs big. So it takes us to the next question. Is having a very big sized egg the best thing for your flock? I would say it's not the best thing that you would like, especially the extra big eggs. They are not very good for your flock because they end up damaging the reproductive tract, which has wounds and also may even get infected. And at the end of the day, we may not end up getting the egg that we want. So naturally, the inclination is we start with small, the higher proportion of small eggs, which the proportion shifts to having middle-sized eggs as the beds matures. And then as it progresses, we get to the large eggs being the majority as we near the end of the cycle, and some extra large eggs, but being a few of the proportion. So most of the time, you would see that the issues when you see the blood on the eggs, it's mostly to do with vent packing that will be happening. So you would be prompted to investigate also if you have adequate nests, and if you have many favorite nests, or if you have excess lighting within the house, or if you are having pooled nests. So these are all areas of investigation when you just want to check on why you are getting the blood on eggs. So just don't conclude or rush into conclusion and say you now have extra large eggs without weighing them. So when you're talking of extra large eggs, I'm talking of eggs that may weigh something like 73 plus grams. Otherwise, most of them, the large eggs, they will be around 60 to around 70 grams as large eggs, and the medium sizes being around 53 or to around 63 grams when you are looking at them. Now, another issue that we most of the time receive from farmers is to do with cannibalism. So what we need to understand as farmers is cannibalism is a vice. A vice is a bad behavior. So bad behaviors, they need to be nipped in the bud before they cement within the flock, before they become normal. So it's one thing to understand behaviors. It's one thing to interpret what you see. So as farmers, keeping birds or poultry is a 24-hour job, and it also involves the use of our senses, the sense of sight, sense of smell, the sense of seeing, and sometimes the sense of tasting. Of course, no, without eating the bird, but maybe the egg, actually, because if you eat the bird, then where will you get the egg from? So the issue to do with cannibalism is quite serious when there is a stressor within the house. So most of the time, any stressor would trigger issues to do with cannibalism. For example, within the photos that are being shown here, with these birds, it was an issue that there was inadequate feed when we visited this farmer, but they tend to fight a lot. When we checked on these birds, you'd find that it was an issue to do more on lack of water. So you can imagine if a bird was going to be pegged from the neck right to the tail head just because there was inadequate water, it's quite serious. So our birds would respond to stress in various ways, some of which we may be surprised with. So whenever you see your birds starting to peck on each other, just try to understand if the resources that you have allocated to them is adequate. Because if there are any inadequacies, then we're bound to run into the birds getting nervous, fighting, and then end up tearing flesh from each other. Now, I'm going to focus now, shift your attention to diseases. I've only picked two because these were the main issues that were bedeviling most farmers in the past time. We have an issue to do with infectious coryza, which is a bacterial infection. What pains me the most is when farmers encounter such infections, they tend to just rush to the treatment stage without really understanding the causative. Is it viral? Is it bacterial? Is it fungal? It's quite key when you are faced with infectious causes to really understand the cause, right? What type of organism you are dealing with and what supports that particular organism. This is the best way to win the war. For example, with infectious coryza, if you are going to have multi-aged sites, you are going to have poor biosecurity, if you are going to have poor hygienic standards, even when you wash and clean and disinfect and rest your premises, then you are bound to have infectious coryza persisting within your premise. So it's quite key for one to understand that even if you treat, for example, infectious coryza, all the birds that survive, they remain carriers, such that in a later stage when they are stressed, they can actually shed the causative agent and actually infect other birds within the flock or even new birds via fomites or other means within the farm. So understanding the causative is quite key whenever you are faced with infectious causes, and getting to understand what supports the causative and then countering those issues, then treating the bird. Just rushing to treat is not the best way to deal with such situations. So with infectious coryza, usually practicing all in, all out activities can actually help stem out the issues to do with coryza, actually thoroughly washing and cleaning the places. And if you are having pullets, it's also key to vaccinate your birds. And when you're talking of vaccinations, when you vaccinate a bird, it does not necessarily mean that the bird will not get sick, but it means it can get sick, but then the clinical signs or the extent of damage caused by disease will be minimal. So that's what happens. So do not vaccinate and then drop the ball by your biosecurity or in other areas and in supposition that everything is okay just because you have vaccinated your flock. The other issue that I'm also going to discuss on, it's an issue to do with coccidiosis. Coccidiosis is caused by protozoa, and these protozoa, they carry different names, but their main predilection site is mostly the intestines, that is from small intestines all the way to the large intestines. Right. So again, with such conditions, what you really need to understand is every poultry rearing facility carries these protozoa. You will find that we have a malaria species in almost every site that keeps poultry. But the good bit is they do not cause infection when they have not matured. So it takes one farmer to drop the ball in terms of litter management, letting your litter get wet with a high temperature. Then this causes the parasites to mature and cause disease. And mind you, it takes an average of around 1 to 2 days to cause infection. And when they are infective, those oocysts, you find they persist for longer, and even the oocysts, they are resistant to most disinfectants. So if it becomes a vicious cycle also if it's added to poor wash, clean, disinfection cycle. So by the end of the day, farmers, what we need really to understand is you have everything to your side, but if you drop your ball in terms of how you manage your sites, then we are bound to have a lot of challenges. And also the good bit is in terms of the feed that you receive at starter and developer stage, they carry coccidio starts, which also aid in reducing issues to do with coccidiosis. But we have actually encountered some farmers that have these outbreaks, which means their management will be really, really bad. I'll take you to the last thing on my slide, which is to do with eggs and egg management. So as farmers, I would love to have you add on your columns a check for weight, egg weight, a check for egg color changes, a check for breakages, and also for dead eggs. This a recording of these parameters would give you a lot of insights into how you're going to be to manage your flock. So most of the time, we do not like to have dirty eggs within our eggs that we pick, because washing eggs would really limit the shelf life of the egg. So we wouldn't want you to have your customers call you and highlight that they no longer want your eggs because they always carry bangers which have foul smell. So we do not want that. So most of the time, ensure that you've well-built nests, ensure that the areas where your birds are laying are not contaminated with a lot of fecal droppings, or they are not laying on the floor. So when you're picking a number of dead eggs, or when the number of dead eggs goes up, then it's time to investigate on the on how you're managing your nest box hygiene, on where your birds are laying, and remove the physical objects within the house that are necessary. And it's also key to manage the number of breakages that you experience, especially those with cages. Sometimes you tend to see that the farmer complains on low production, but besides the cage, there are a lot of eggs that break, because that egg that is broken, yes, it has broken, but it's an egg that has been laid on that day. But on your records, it's not there because it's not been picked as an egg that you can account for, but it's an egg that has been laid. So if you table and record breakages, it helps you to understand when to repair and maintain your cages, because sometimes the cages themselves, they'll be allowing the eggs to roll out and then break on the ground. If you are carrying nest boxes, then you need to understand that if your birds are pulling within a particular nest, or if you are having an adequate nest, or if your nests do not have padding in form of a litter. And this litter, to maintain also nest box hygiene, we really encourage that it be replaced at least once every 2 weeks. If you can improve the frequency, then the better. Color changes, most of the time, they signal infectious causes such as Newcastle, infectious bronchitis. But it's not just that when you see color changes 1 out of 10 eggs, then you say, there's something that's gone really bad. But most of the time, you will see that there is an increase on the changes. And last but not least, the issue to do with egg weights. It's good to routinely take egg weights, because they give you the best guide in terms of your layer health. So you find most of the time, egg weight drops first before we have a drop in the weight of the bird itself, or before we see manifestation of clinical signs of an infection or any other thing that we start seeing at the end. So it's quite a good indicator of the health of your birds. You need to quite understand, see it, and manage it very well. So In conclusion, with the rising of the sun each day as a farmer, try to always remind yourself that there is no substitute for good husbandry, no medicine from any other planet, including ours, that can substitute good husbandry. The best medicine for any enterprise that is practicing poultry is to do good for your birds, then you will make it. Thank you for the good listening, farmers.
Sure. Many thanks, Doc, for such a wonderful presentation. We really appreciate, and you covered key issues there on your presentation. Thank you once again. We are now in the question and answer session, and please do keep your questions and comments coming via the chat room or Facebook if you are watching us live on the Agribusiness Media Facebook page. And if you wish to participate via audio, please rename your device to include your full name. And please note that we had shared most of the questions that you sent in the training build-up group with the presenters, so they were answered in the presentations. If you need more clarity on your question, please feel free to comment, and we have now opened the chat room, so you can comment there. And then the first question that we have here is, what are the advantages and disadvantages of not using cages? I don't know, Doc, if you can take that one.
All right, it's all good, Rawlings. When it comes to making a decision on which side to start with, starting with cages, it's capital intensive. So if you have the capital, then you can just go for it. But if you don't, then depleter will be the best for you.
Okay, thanks, Doc, for taking that one. And then another one here is, does change in weather pattern have an effect on egg production?
All right, super. So when you look at it for a bird to lay, this is what you will actually find. You will find that we need adequate light, we need the right weight, we need adequate nutrition, and we need also less stress. So whenever we are going to have weather patterns that do not promote consistent photo periods or light intensity, then we run into issues of a drop in egg production. So surely season can actually affect production patterns of our flocks, because we would love the adequate lighting to stimulate the birds to produce hormones that trigger the whole process of egg laying, and then also nutrition to build the egg and until we get to the end.
All right, thanks again, Doc. Then this one is a scenario, or it's a case that this farmer is sent, and the farmer has about 918 layers, and he shared with us the following tabulation of his performance of his layers. So he has noted that the production level is now around 60 to 63%. So his question is, should I cull my layers? Should I sell as off layers, or should I continue trying? Are there any areas that I need to adjust or to correct?
All right. Thank you very much for sharing the information. It's quite good record keeping. The issue usually most of the time, the general guide is, most of the time, if production goes below 60%, then you are no longer making much profit, then you may need to make the decision to cull your flock. But as we consider here, you can see actually that we are having the birds at a level of being aged. I think it's an old flock. It's almost towards 86 weeks of age, which I think it's actually a good thing. If money is there to just rest the flock, it will not be much of a problem if they rest their flock, because the issue is as they age, a lot of damage also tends to occur within that productive system and as they continue. So even if we try to push them, sometimes we may not get the production performance we would love. But nevertheless, I've actually seen some flocks at 98%, 98 weeks of age and performing around 73, 75% production. I've actually seen that, especially the time when we are having issues to do with replacement stock. So it's still possible. It would mean there may need to be more investigations on the ground just to see what else could have happened, how much was being given to the birds, and where they laying, any other disease that can have affected the flock, etc. But there is actually still a lease of life in the birds, but considering the age, most of the time we usually rear the birds in production to around 78 weeks, which is not much of a big deal. But yeah, it's not out of this world to also see flocks going as far as even 90 weeks old and then still in production and producing very well. Hello, Rawlings.
Oh, oops, I was on mute. Okay. So another question here. I think this one is for Bianca. It says, I've seen videos of farmers giving salt blocks to their layers. Does this help anything? Bianca, I know you mentioned this in your presentation. Oh, oops, I think Bianca's network is dropped. I don't know if you can, are you able to take that one? It's about using salt blocks in layers. Does it help? Is it advisable?
All right. So basically, Rawlings, we do not encourage such practices, because what happens is within the feed, there are adequate sodium chloride levels. And if you are in doubt, we actually encourage our farmers to usually take at least 500 grams of the sample and take it to the nearest lab or to the lab from where the feed has come, so that it can be analyzed and we get to know and see the levels of the sodium and chloride within the feed. So the reason why I'm saying we may not encourage, or we do not want to encourage use of salt as a practice, it's because excess salt within these systems may lead to poisoning. So most of the time it's in poultry and pigs, we usually do not want salt. It leads to poisoning, salt poisoning. And with this poisoning, what usually happens is when they take the salt in excess, it may lead to excess water within their brains or their heads, which tends to give us a lot of issues which are central nervous system related, and sometimes even death. So we usually do not like that. And apart from that, taking a lot of salt may also increase the amount of water that the birds are taking. So that may actually mess up the litter and will actually increase bacterial loads within our flocks, and also may predispose, if it's usually in the wet season, may actually predispose the flocks to coccidiosis.
Thanks very much, Doc. Then another one is, how does one distinguish between unproductive and productive hens, because they usually look healthy and big? Is there any way that we can help this farmer?
All right, fine. Thank you very much. So distinguishing between productive and non-productive hens within a flock, most of the time if you are walking through a flock, what you see, if you raise your hand or if you raise your legs as you are walking, you find most of the time the birds, they will sort of squat on the ground. That's also another sign that you can use to know that this bird is laying on. It's not, of course, it's unfortunate, it's not very reliable, because the moment you do it repeatedly, even on the same bed, it may no longer repeat the same actions or activities. So most of the time is to do the pinbone test, where you are going to test how many of your fingers quite fit between the pelvic bones. That can actually help you distinguish if the birds are laying or not. I think that's a bit reliable than other measures. So you will find that when you put in 1 or 2 fingers, then that bird is not laying. And if you are putting 2, 3 fingers from an average person between the pin bones, then you are okay. The bird is laying. So it's actually one way you can see. Another way which you can also try to use is to put the birds on a scale. You have the performance measures of that bird, including the weights, and then you take the actual weights of the birds. Through the birds that are well below the weight of their age, then you find that those birds they will not be in lay, and the birds that are on the weight or very near the target weight and slightly above, then those birds will be laying very well.
Okay, thanks, Doc. That was quite informative. Then a question here is, thank you, Doc Garikai. It's Mavis. I would like to integrate the brown highlines to my indigenous bushveld, and the housing systems are nearer to each other. Will it be an area of concern in terms of disease transmission? I think you're muted, Doc.
Thank you. If I heard you clearly, it can be an issue to do with what would I would refer to as a multi-species site. So you would find sometimes with our breeds that will be selling, the ones that are for commercial purposes, you will find sometimes they are in course less hardier when we compare to the counterparts that are more of being indigenous. So there is a chance of us perpetuating diseases. For example, with one disease that I had alluded to earlier on, which is infectious coryza, we will end up having issues to do with persistence of such diseases and even others. So I do not know how that farmer would manage such a place, because the issue we need to understand as farmers that when we are instructed to rest a house after we've washed, cleaned, and disinfected at the grow-out period, you will find that we are trying to say we have killed all the organisms that we see. We have removed all the debt that we see with our eyes, and we have tried to kill all the organisms that we don't see with our eyes using the disinfectants. But there are some organisms such as litter beetles, lesser mealworms, flies, worms, etc. All those parasites, as they move about, we are sort of starving them because they survive better and multiply more because there is feed, there is manure, or there are beds, or there is a certain level of temperature that we are providing our flocks, and that's also improving their well-being. So by resting houses, we are trying to cut off supply, food or resource supply to these parasites, such that we also break disease. So when we are having these houses adjacent to each other or integrated together, there are chances that when, for example, the commercial layers are out, then we are having the parasites shifting to the indigenous flock, and vice versa. Such that when you bring in new flock, then the parasites, they can quickly and easily recolonize their nike. So it's usually not advisable to have different species on the same site and also close by, or different houses close by. So in the case of having disease outbreaks, then we will end up having a lot of issues, and it becomes very difficult to control diseases.
Thanks again, Doc, for taking that one. And Michael here says, just checking whether chicken in cages, layers in cages generally lay more than those in deep litter or vice versa.
All right, fine. So an issue to do with laying more eggs or less eggs more often than not is more inclined towards how you're going to be managing your flocks. Otherwise, the genetic potential to lay eggs is the same for the bird within a cage or within deep litter. What gives us the main differences that we see in terms of performance, it is to do with how we are managing. That is the reason why you see farmers with the same bird, same breed of bird from the same shop with the same feed, but doing different production systems. You will see that sometimes they end up performing differently. So there's an input to do on how you are managing a flock. If I'm to give an example, by yesterday we had one farmer who is just after the Chikurubi areas are there in the suburbs that are that side. You find they were having their layer enterprise within cages, but they were at 93% production, which is quite a good sterling performance. But then if you would see years back, I still remember, I think around 2014, 2015, it's one of there's a flock which was around it should be around 3,000, and with that flock it was in deep litter system, but it still holds a dear place within me, within my heart. Why? Because it persisted at around 93-94% for more than 4 months. So it was no joke in terms of how the effort, the amount of effort that was being given by the farmer for the bed. So sometimes it's beyond the bed in terms of how much it should perform. It is to do with us as farmers and how much effort we are going to put in terms of how our bed is going to perform.
Very informative. Thanks, Doc. Then, Vusimu Vinyati, your hand is up. You can go ahead and ask your question or comment.
Did you have the input? Which is for yeah? Did you have an input?
Okay, all right. Then another one here is okay, all right. Kuzai Ishe says, thank you for the presentations, Doc and Bianca. Are there any challenges if birds gain a lot of weight? How does one adapt their birds to a new environment? For instance, the onset of rains. And lastly, any comment on egg peritonitis? I think there are multiple questions here. The first one is, are there challenges if birds gain a lot of weight?
All right, fine. Thank you very much. So basically, you would find your layer bed is not inclined to a voracious appetite as the one we see in the broilers. So in terms of them getting overweight, it does okay, but most of the time it's a bit rare. Especially if we're giving standard layer feed. So most of the time we will tend to have birds getting overweight. That is if they are being fed the wrong type of feed, because sometimes farmers, they are mischievous, they go an extent of giving or providing the wrong type of feed to their birds, and in the hope that they will perform better than when they are getting their normal standard layers feed. So I would say when you are in doubt, use a scale. Please use a scale, compare it to the standards, and that would give you the right direction to take. So you find under normal system, under normal situations, you find a normal distribution curve is the one we can plot in terms of the weights of the birds, where we have lighter birds, medium-sized birds, and heavy birds, but not necessarily meaning that the heavier birds, they've committed the crime of being heavy. Birds on their own, they have their pecking hierarchies. So when you are feeding them, you need to be observant, highly observant within of the flock as they are feeding, so that you understand their feeding patterns and if you should increase feeders or not, because sometimes you see that the heavier birds, they feed first and always, so it's to do with the hierarchies that would lead to the skewed distribution of the quantities of feed they will be taking. So if you see that there are too many birds feeding on particular feeders, while some are not, then you may need to have the birds taking adding more of the feeders within the house. But otherwise, in general, if you are in doubt, when you are thinking the birds are overweight, check on the breed standard weights and then use your actual scale to weigh, then you compare. That separates common sense from nonsense so that you can make a decision. And then from then onwards, issues to do with peritonitis. Peritonitis, usually we notice it when we are having reproductive infections that I've been highlighting previously. So you will find that the end of the day, when we have infections, they move all the way from the cloaca all the way to the ovaries, and then the bacteria start feeding on the egg yolk. So you end up having egg peritonitis. So basically, the best thing to prevent egg yolk peritonitis or peritonitis is make sure you improve your nest box hygiene, is to make sure you use some antibiotics to treat birds that are infected or the depressed birds within your flock. It's also good to make sure you do not overstimulate birds as they are coming into lay. As you do so, you cause what I would say, you would upset the rhythm of lay or the rhythm at which ova are released from the ovary, to the extent that some of the yolk or the eggs are deposited in the abdomen. Then we end up having the peritonitis as would be.
All right, thanks again, Doc. Then I think because of our time, we'll just take the last question. The last question here says, I am having problems with my layers. I have 249 and I am only collecting 3.5 crates per day. What should I do to maximize the production?
All right. So when you have some situations within your flock, as I alluded to earlier on, it's key to investigate. But the investigations, they are guided by records. So as a farmer, the first point of call is for you to check on the records. And then in your records, make sure you capture as much detail as possible, so that even when you hire someone or when you invite us to discuss on your records, you really know what would have happened. Was it because you experienced a drop in production just because you were out of feed, or you experienced that the birds were coughing a bit, or you had heavy rains, or you were absent, or you forgot to give them drinking water? So you find that there are a lot of confounders into this issue. So you would need to be guided by the records. You'd need to understand how much water they were taking. Were they taking the adequate feed? Were the birds on deep litter system? Were they on cages? If they were in deep litter system, did we have good litter within the houses? Because, for example, with the last thing that I mentioned, we have some farmers that have their layer beds, but their layer beds, they are laying well as they are within cement or when they are within floors that are cement or made of cement. So that means with our bed, much of the nutrition that is supposed to be channeled towards egg production is being channeled towards heat generation. If there are any issues to do with infections, then they will be channeled towards fighting off infection. So in basic, what we are saying is the bed would really need to first of all satisfy its own maintenance needs, then channel the excess nutrition towards laying the egg. So if there's anything that becomes a stressor to this whole scenario, then we will have the part on performance being channeled towards fighting off or managing the stress the bed is encountering. Rawlings, you're on mute.
Thanks, Doc. Thank you very much for taking all these questions and for clarifying on all the issues that our farmers raised. And we still have a lot of questions and comments. I think now about 47 questions and comments to go. But because of our time, unfortunately, we have to end the meeting. So please note, farmers, that we do have a WhatsApp group for further interaction after this training. So you can join via the link that we have sent through. So this marks the end of our webinar. We would like to express our gratitude to our sponsors, which is Profeeds, for making this event possible. And special thanks to Bianca and Dr. Marutsi for sharing their invaluable knowledge. And to all farmers, thank you for your participation in this wonderful discussion on egg production business. We do hope that you have learned a lot from today's session. We wish you all the best, farmers. From us at Agribusiness Media, have a great day. Libe ngelangelihle movenezora kanaka. Thank you.
Thank you, Rawlings. Thank you, our good farmers.